He came a long way to be here today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. I hope you are too. Tom is one of the nation's leading advocates of individual liberty, free enterprise, private property rights, personal privacy, back to basics, education, and American sovereignty and independence. A resident of Virginia since 1982, Tom is a native of Ohio. He's been a candidate for the Ohio legislature, served as editor of 2 newspapers, and has owned several businesses since the age of 23. He was listed in the Outstanding Young of America in 1981 and 82, and was added to the National Registry of Who's Who in 2000. In 1989, Tom led the only privately funded election observation team to the Panamanian elections. In 2006, Tom was invited to Cambridge University to debate the issue of the United Nations before the Cambridge Union, a 200-year-old debating society. Today, he serves as founder and president of the American Policy Center, editor of the DeWeese Report, and author of the book, Now Tell Me I Was Wrong. Tom has appeared on such national programs including Fox News, The Michael Reagan Show, and quoted in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. Tom was one of the first to voice concern over the radical agenda of the environmental movement and to question its motives. Since '92, he has been sounding the alarm against the United Nations Agenda 21 and its policy of sustainable development as a threat to private property rights, free markets, American sovereignty, and independence. For over 45 years, Tom DeWeese has been a businessman, grassroots activist, writer, and publisher. As such, he has always advocated a firm belief in man's need to keep moving forward while protecting our constitutionally guaranteed rights. That's it. I don't have any more to say. Give Tom a big hand.
Thank you very much. I'm really thrilled to be here today. I'm having to see Lynn. We've actually been able to work on a couple of articles together that were very important, and I'm getting ready to do a 3rd one. So we're going to do that. I'm going to move up here, not because I want to be on high and look down at you, but because I have lots of things to hold and I need my hands to talk. So I'm going to move up here. When I got started years ago, one of my best friends was a preacher's son. And I started an organization when I was 18, 19 years old. And he was telling his father, who was out in the yard working in the garden, he had his trowel going like this, and he was telling him what I was doing. And his father didn't like me a whole lot. And I remember him saying as he's working with the trowel, if we could just get Tom building churches, And a few years ago, I found myself in another pulpit like this, and I was thinking, Reverend Isaacs, if you could see me now. So, this one works, okay.
That microphone works.
Yeah, okay. Turn this. Thank you. Okay, this works okay?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Again, as I said, I'm excited to see you here today because meetings like this are taking place across the country. This is brand new over the last few years. We fought Agenda 21, the implementation of it, since its inception, even before that. And we spent an awful lot of years with nobody hearing us at all. And I know a lot of people get discouraged, and they think this is such a vast issue, and it is. And it becomes discouraging to them because they think there's no way that we can fight this. There's no way that we can stop this. We have lost the republic. But if you look at it from my point of view, where we had no one, and today we have a fight. We are making baby steps. Yes, they're baby steps, but we're making steps forward. And where there used to be only 3 or 4 of us that talked about this issue across the country, now there are hundreds talking about it. There are thousands attending. And so you've got to take it from that perspective. We are starting to build a movement, and it's starting to have some effect. And the other side is really, really concerned about that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Because I know that there are those of you here who have heard of Agenda 21 and you know its threat. And of course there are those who really don't know what it is, and you're here and you're willing to learn, and I welcome you because this is how we build. And it doesn't matter the size of the audience, it matters the quality of the audience. I have had many, many audiences of just 10, 15, 25 people, and some of the people who came out of those audiences are some of our fiercest leaders today in this fight. That's what matters, because we'll spread it to more. But then there are those, and I'm sure there must be one or two somewhere hidden in this building, that have their arms folded in front of them and they're, just rolling their eyes at me for spreading silly or even dangerous conspiracy theories. So, the idea that Agenda 21 is a conspiracy theory, that's what you hear everywhere you go. And elected officials, if you go in and talk to them about Agenda 21, and they may listen, and what you don't see in your government is behind the scenes this horde of non-governmental organizations and federal agents and so forth, all there. And your elected official may listen to you and say, hey, this guy just talked to me about this thing called Agenda 21. And, oh, come on. Doesn't exist, conspiracy theory, don't pay attention to it. And that's why you never hear anything come out of that. So, let me get this 1,000-pound gorilla out of the way right now so that we can have a serious talk about this very dangerous situation. The Southern Poverty Law Center, my favorite organization, they were so kind to put me on their list of potential domestic terrorists. And I didn't have a tag before that, so I was really happy to have a label put on. Here's what they said in an attack against me on Agenda 21. They said, quote, Agenda 21 is not a treaty. It has no force of law, no enforcement mechanisms, no penalties, and no significant funding. It is not even a top-down recommendation, seeking instead to encourage communities around the world to come up with their own solutions to overpopulation, pollution, poverty, and resource depletion. It is a feel-good guide that cannot force anyone, anywhere, to do anything at all. And today, as I said, if you go into your local government meetings to ask questions and mention Agenda 21, you get that eye roll, and they just a lot of times people are just escorted out the room. But isn't it interesting that to note that up until the mid-2000s, no one was saying Agenda 21 was a right-wing fringe fantasy. Go back in history, 1992, the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, 50,000 delegates, and that was made up of 179 heads of state, diplomats, business leaders, government bureaucrats, and members of thousands of non-governmental organizations. And let me say, just because there's an organization exists does not make it an NGO or non-governmental organization. In the UN Charter, NGO is a specific designation that gives these private organizations equal footing with delegations from other countries. So they are there. They call them the citizens. There are representatives there. You understand? But they all converged on Rio de Janeiro to introduce to the world a document that they call a comprehensive blueprint for reorganizing human society. Now, obviously, they thought this was pretty serious stuff. And then, as was mentioned earlier, Nancy Pelosi introduced the idea in a resolution to the U.S. Congress that fall, and what did she say? It's a comprehensive blueprint. Those are the words. I've got that C-SPAN video on my website at AmericanPolicy.org. You can tune in there and see it. In 1993, the UN, in one of its own publications, described Agenda 21 like this, quote, Agenda 21 proposes an array of actions which are intended to be implemented by every person on earth. It calls for specific changes in the activities of all people. Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all humans unlike anything the world has ever experienced. Now let's go back. See, what did the Southern Poverty Law Center say here? It's just to encourage and people to find their own solutions and no force of law or anything at all require a profound... In 1994, the American Planning Association, one of the largest and respected planning groups in the country, they're in almost every single community in this country, they put out a newsletter to their Northern California members that described their planning programs, and they described Agenda 21 as a comprehensive blueprint for the work they were doing. See a pattern here kind of coming together? In 1997, the United States issued a 70-page report to the United Nations on the progress the United States was making to implement Agenda 21. I've got it right here. In 1998, the Federal Register issued a report on the EPA's Challenge Grant Program. That report says that the EPA's Challenge Grant Program is also implementation of Agenda 21. And in 2011, the EPA issued a revised report entitled History of Sustainability. This was designed by the EPA to show where they got their ideas for sustainability, who influenced them, where did it come from. The fifth item on that report is Agenda 21. This is 2011, calling it a comprehensive process of planning and action to attain sustainability. And on it went about Agenda 21, the blueprint, the plan, the consensus, the direction for changing how people live. Here was the plan for the 21st century for human society. They were quite proud of it. In fact, it wasn't until the mid-2000s that such pride started to change to denial and charges of conspiracy theories. Why? What happened? Well, that's when I and others started to be heard, to reveal the truth about Agenda 21 and sound the alarm bells. People started standing up in city council meetings and county commission meetings and say, what about this Agenda 21? And suddenly, the Sustainable Development Movement became hard-pressed to remember anything about something called Agenda 21. Never heard of it, went the crowd. In fact, the entire environmental movement, officials in government, planning groups, and NGOs went suddenly dumb. Now, where have we seen such a unified dumbness in recent times? Remember late last year when some videos suddenly appeared showing an arrogant little twerp named Jonathan Gruber telling his audiences that the way they got Obamacare through Congress was because of the stupidity of the American people? Lack of transparency, he smugly stated, is a huge political advantage. And when those Obamacare-related videos caused a sensation across the country, remember the response from Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid and Barack Obama? Never heard of him. They said he had no official capacity. Yet Pelosi had introduced him as the key expert on the Obamacare plan. He had been to the White House numerous times, something like 40 times, and they paid him 7 figures to guide it through Congress. You see, those same tactics have been used by the Agenda 21 crowd for years to discredit us. There is no plan, they tell us, just some old ideas from a meaningless document. So in the mid-2000s, as we began to score some victories against Agenda 21, the other side panicked. They had controlled the issue for so long, that they didn't know what to do when we started to expose them. So they launched attacks against us, all designed to discredit us. Pay no attention to those little creepy guys in the back of the room. The American Planning Association worked to retrain its planners in how to deal with us, removing the use of common words that they had been using to describe it. I have joked many times that if they continue doing this, eventually they're going to have to start doing their presentations in sign language because they won't have any words left to use. Now I ask you, if you believe in something, if you put together a plan for something and you begin to promote it, it's because you believe in it. Aren't you proud of it? And if somebody attacks you, you defend it. What is it with these guys? What is it they're hiding that suddenly, when you begin to rise up and ask questions about it, they hide it behind their back and say, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't take any candy. What are you talking about? The American Planning Association went out of its way to put on its website a myths and facts section which boldly claims that the APA has no connection with Agenda 21 whatsoever. J. Gary Lawrence, I'm sure you've heard this quote before if you're involved in this issue, a planner and an advisor to Bill Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development, told his fellow planners, quote, participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many right-wing conspiracy groups who would actively work to defeat any elected official undertaking local Agenda 21. So, we will call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. And so they have. If you go into the websites of your local communities and to their visioning plan, which they all have, these are the words that you're going to find. In the most recent Southern Poverty Law Center attack, it scolds local officials for paying any attention to people like me. In complete exasperation, the Southern Poverty Law Center demanded that the business community, the Chamber of Commerce, local governments, and the news media stop reporting on Agenda 21 as if it were a bona fide controversy. Their words. Further, it demanded that communities need to be encouraged to return to or start to develop such plans in tandem with responsible groups like the American Planning Association. In other words, what they were saying, stop questioning these plans and just shut up and do it. Now ask yourself, what plan? What plan is the Southern Poverty Law Center telling that they need to impose? They just assured us that there was no such plan, didn't they? The fact is, Agenda 21 certainly does exist, and it is being enforced at every level of government. Now it's true that Agenda 21 is not a treaty. It is not a law. The proper term for Agenda 21 is soft law. It is a recommendation. It is a guideline, or in their words, a comprehensive blueprint. That means that it is true that the plan in itself has no enforcement capability, and it is true that there are no, this is my favorite criticism of us, there are no blue helmeted troops at City Hall. I like that one. So why is it a threat? And how did it get into your community and into your backyard? To understand the true threat of Agenda 21, you must first understand that it is not an environmental policy or just a good idea for planning future development for the community. Agenda 21 is a threat to our nation, to our local community, to you, because it is a comprehensive blueprint specifically designed to change our way of life and our form of government. That's its true purpose. That's why it's called an agenda. Now those of you, if you're there with those folded arms in front of you, don't buy what I'm saying. That's just my radical, nut, right-wing kook side talking. Well, okay. Let me stop using my words, and let me tell you how they openly plan to do this non-existent plan to transform our society. Let me use their words. This is from the UN's Biodiversity Assessment Report, which, by the way, is about that thick, on what is not sustainable. Ski runs, grazing of livestock, plowing of soil, building fences, industry, single-family homes, paved and tarred roads, logging activities and reservoirs, power line construction, and get this, and economic systems that fail to set proper values on the environment. Now, what kind of economic system could that be? Oh yeah, free markets. The executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, her name is Christiana Figueres, said in 2012, she said this. Listen to this very carefully. Quote, "What is occurring here is in the whole climate change process is the complete transformation of the economic structure of the world." And just last month, she added to this, she said, quote, "This is the first time in the history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution." Al Gore said that we will have to go through a wrenching transformation of society in order to cleanse us of the horrors of the 20th century Industrial Revolution. Let me give you a little bit of history here, just in a time frame. From Alexander the Great to Thomas Jefferson, human society moved at basically the same pace. Alexander the Great, Thomas Jefferson lit their homes with candlelight, and they rode horses to get where they wanted to go. The 1890s, something started. Four men changed all that. Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and the Wright brothers. They took what was then a slow-paced, you might argue, well-ordered society, and they changed it all to a revolution, to where man could live healthier, more comfort, more wealth, faster, more comfortable. The proponents of Agenda 21 want to end all of that. At the 2012 Rio Plus 20 Summit in Rio de Janeiro, 20 years of celebrating Agenda 21, which doesn't exist, the main theme of their plans called for zero economic growth. Think about that. Zero economic growth. Now, Barack Obama's been really good at this. Naomi Klein, a left-wing writer writing in the Liberal Nation magazine in 2011, wrote, quote, "So when people like Tom DeWeese react to climate change as if capitalism itself were coming under threat, it's not because they are paranoid, it is because they are paying attention. Killing capitalism is the real goal of Agenda 21. But on a local level, that can't be the purpose behind local planning. Our local officials assure us that all of their plans are local." Well, the American Planning Association is the largest and most respected planning group in the nation, and they are operating, as I said, in almost every community. The American Planning Association is part of something called the Planners Network. If you go to their website, plannersnetwork.com, and read its statement of principles, this is what it says. This is what the American Planning Association believes, and it's what almost every planner in the country believes that their plans are designed to do. This is what their statement of principles said. We believe planning should be a tool for allocating resources and eliminating the great inequalities of wealth and power in society, because the free market has proven incapable of doing this. They're telling you that their planning programs are about redistribution of wealth. That is what Agenda 21 is, a plan for redistribution of the world's wealth. Zero economic growth tells you how they intend to redistribute the wealth. And that's why every planner in every community, they believe this, that's what they're putting in place. Now why? What is the purpose of Agenda 21 and Sustainable Development? Let me get even clearer. An author named Ted Trainer explains how and why to impose the local process, as he described it in his book, Transition to a Sustainable and Just World. The word just comes up, justice comes up all the time with this, because they are, as we're learning with Common Core, children are learning that anything that we did before as free individuals wasn't fair. So now we're going to have justice. Ted Trainer said this, quote, "Consumer society cannot be reformed to make it sustainable or just. It must be largely replaced by a society with fundamentally different structures. Local planning focuses on curtailing energy and natural resources and land use." And he went on to say, what then is the most effective transition strategy? The essential aim is not to fight against consumer capitalist society, but to build the alternative to it. And he goes on to say, nothing of lasting significance will be achieved unless it is clearly understood that our efforts in these local initiatives are the first steps in the eventual replacement of the present society by one which is not driven by market forces, profit, competition, growth, or affluence. Zero economic growth. And what he's talking about here is social justice. That means redistribution of wealth. Every time you hear that term now in television, on the news, social justice, understand it means redistribution of wealth. And you know what? The first person to use that term, social justice, was Karl Marx. And by the way, Ted Trainer is an avowed Marxist. Start to see a pattern here? And still, local proponents, planning groups, planning departments, and elected officials deny any such connections to their planning programs, even as they vote to impose these plans put on by these planners. Now, we tell you about the UN connection because that is history. It's important to know the background behind these things. I will say it's not important that when you go to city council and you get 3 minutes that you tell them all that. It took a little while to learn this. But it's important to know the driving force behind it if you clearly want to understand the roots. But what we all need to really focus on is how they are imposing Agenda 21 at every level of government. Now, we live in an age of sound bites. This is a massive issue. It is mind-boggling. How do you get into a sound bite? Well, I've been working on it for a long time, and over time, I've brought it down to 3 steps. The 3 means of attack that they are using to implement Agenda 21 on us are these: destroy private property ownership and control, impose unelected regional councils and governments, taking government further away from the people, destroying representative government, and 3, to feed the plan with federal grant money. Remember those 3 things: destruction of private property, unelected regional councils, federal grants. You oppose it, you can oppose those 3 things, it makes it much easier to comprehend. Now let me tell you, here is the exact course that brought Agenda 21 to America through Congress, through your state legislature, and through your county and your city government, and into your backyard. As I said, over 50,000 world leaders, non-governmental organizations and government bureaucrats, 179 heads of state signed agreement to Agenda 21 in Rio 1992. Then it gained huge momentum. In 1993, when President Bill Clinton issued Executive Order 12852 to create the President's Council on Sustainable Development that made it official policy in the United States. This document that they say has no teeth to it, it's got no legs, it's got nothing. This is where it began to sprout the legs. This is where it began to get official control. Then, those same NGOs who wrote Agenda 21 at the international level converged on our federal government and helped to write federal policies in every single agency of our government. Most importantly, they helped to create grant programs. The grants through HUD, EPA, Department of Transportation, and nearly every other agency in the federal government are the Kool-Aid used to spread the policy across the nation. They tell you the grants are voluntary, and in a sense they are. But they come with very specific strings attached that are, in fact, sustainable policy. A few examples include restrictions on energy use, development, building codes, and water controls. The rules impose guidelines created on the international level for building materials, plumbing codes, electrical codes, installing bike lanes, building apartment buildings with no parking lots, and establishment of public transportation, including light rail trains. If a community takes the grant, they accept the restrictions. In short, they must implement the guidelines of Agenda 21. After creating such programs, the same NGOs headed to your state legislature and lobbied for legislation that forced every community to impose comprehensive development plans to plan the future for the community. Now you've got city councilmen and county commissioners sitting there and saying, what the heck is a comprehensive development plan? Oh, not to worry. In come the NGOs, they've got it all in a box right there for you. They've got sample legislation, they've got training programs, they've got computer programs, they can set criteria, and they've got the money for it all right here in the grants. So, they tell your city councilman, sign here, now press real hard, there's 3 million copies. There it is, all in the box. They don't even have to think, it's all done for them. This is an important thing that you have got to know. These non-governmental organizations, whether they are planning groups or the Nature Conservancy and the Sierra Club and the Audubon Society and National Education Association and on and on and on, or federal agencies, not federal agencies, but organizations like the National Governors Association, the National Conference of Mayors. There are organizations like this for city councilmen, for county commissioners, and all that. Every one of these are private 501c3 organizations. They have no more influence or ability or right to govern than you or I do if we decide to put a little organization together, except when your elected officials give it to them. That's where they get their power. That's where they get their influence. And if you want to stop that, then what you need to do is begin to elect representatives who will not give them that and throw them out. They will, if you had elected officials that didn't give them that power, then these private organizations would dry up and blow away. They'd certainly have no control and influence on your community. Your elected officials give it to them. That's the dirty little secret that's hiding from you under all of the pretty words about livable communities and smart growth. And what are the results of these internationally created, federally funded, state-enforced assault on your local community and on your own home? Private property rights are disappearing. Energy is being tightly controlled. Jobs are disappearing. Community development means pack and stack, high-rise housing, and bike paths are jamming roads. You go into your meetings today. Now you go in, try to talk to them, and what are you saying? Constitution. Talk about the Constitution all the time. You talk about your rights. You talk about, I want to do this, it's my property, I want to do that. Here's the words they use. See if you hear any of your words in here. Wetlands, conservation easements, watersheds, viewsheds, rails to trails, biosphere reserves, greenways, carbon footprints, partnerships, preservation, stakeholders, land use, environmental protection, development, diversity, visioning, open space, heritage areas, and comprehensive planning. That's the language of government today. Constitution? I don't know what that is. Get out of the way. The function of legitimate elected government within the sustainability system is fast becoming little more than the rubber stamp to create and enforce the dictates of something called stakeholder councils, run by, you guessed it, the same NGO organizations that wrote Agenda 21 in the first place. That's stakeholder councils. You're the stakeholders. You're the ones who live there. You're the ones who are influenced by what they do. These guys don't live there. They came from somewhere else. They're not stakeholders. They're carpetbaggers. They don't belong there. What they're doing is they are creating the demise of representative government. I said in the beginning, Agenda 21 is about the reorganization of human society and changing our form of government. And that is what I'm talking about right there. That's how they're doing it. And these councils, they appear almost overnight. Where did this come from? You find watershed councils that regulate human action near every trickling stream, river, and lake. Meters are put on wells. Special action councils control the size of your home, or whether you can prune your tree or remove it. Even the color you can paint your home or the height of your grass. There's one environmental organization, and I know they operated in Fairfax, Virginia, because I was familiar with it. I'm sure they're in other places. Their job, their goal, their mission was to go throughout the community and count the trees, the number of trees. And they established how many trees were in that community. The urban forest, they called it. Now, they put a price on that. We used to decide the value of a community by its infrastructure, by what it had in it. Now it's decided by how many trees. So what happens when you cut down one tree? You just diminish the value of the community. That's the purpose of it. That's what they do. You have special action councils, historic preservation councils. Once these councils are established, it becomes much more difficult to discuss issues with your elected representative. This is the point. Instead, you go in and try to talk to them and say, this policy is put in, it's really affecting me, affecting my business, affecting my property, whatever the case may be. And what's he going to say to you? He's going to say, well, you need to go down to such and such council. They're the ones that handle that. I don't need to deal with that. They just took government out of your hands. The brilliance of what our founding fathers gave us was that government, particularly on the local level, were your friends and your neighbors, elected by you, answerable to you. That is being eliminated, and today, these nameless, faceless bureaucrats, these political hacks that are appointed there with their own political agenda, don't care what you think. They've got an agenda, and they're going to do it no matter what your complaint is. And now, this all to stop the councils brings us back to the UN connection and our concerns about it. The UN Commission on Global Governance said, quote, regionalism must precede globalism. We foresee a seamless system of governance from local communities, individual states, regional unions, and up through the United Nations itself, end quote. Is it then a coincidence that regionalism is becoming the fastest growing change in how our government is operating? If you try to challenge the legitimacy of the regional councils to make for them to make policy, you will be told. If you go in and say, these guys are unelected, they don't represent me, they're going to say to you, well, we got elected representatives on there. We've got city councilmen and county commissioners and so forth. They're on the board. Yeah, but they weren't elected to that. And they're operating in the back room. They're not accountable to you. This is where we begin to lose the control of our government. And that is a ruse, that is a lie that says that they're there representing you. They're not. They're representing this agenda, these powerful forces in it. That's why it's so difficult today to deal with government, to get them to listen to you, because they don't care. They make their plans in the back rooms and out of sight and out of the reach of the people. Of course, they would never express it that way. These guys, they're so smooth, slick. When I get in a room with them, I start to itch. Standing in them. The New York Association of Regional Councils describes their mission this way, quote, regional councils were created to provide a regional approach to concerns that cross the lines of local government jurisdictions. These councils are a vehicle for local governments to share their resources and to make the most of funding, planning, and human resources. They tell us that there are many of their organizations that are actually voluntary and that they do not legislate, rather that they answer to the representatives of the community to their regions. It's just a discussion, we're told. Those are the same words that the American Planning Association are using in a document they put together called Glossary for the Public. It's just a discussion. We are not doing anything here. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. We're not doing anything here. First, that description that they share resources and make the most of funding and planning and human resources is a direct description of a top-down planning. Plans made for you. Human resources? Is that what you are? A human resource? Something for them to use at their will? Or are you a human being, an individual who has your own ideas of how you want to live your life, your own ideas of what you want to do with your life, and what you want to do with your property? That's the American way. That was the genius of the way the government was put together in our country. It recognized that you from birth had those rights because God gave them to you. And instead, these monsters that are putting together Agenda 21 see you as a human resource. You know, when I had my own company, I refused to have a human resources director. I had a personnel director because I had people who worked for me. Just torques my gourd when I hear that. Here's how it really works. Communities across the nation are being pressured by federal agencies like HUD, EPA, and the Department of Transportation to accept grants to create, for the creation of local sustainable projects. As with anything coming from the federal government, it is not free. There are strings attached. Taking federal money means federal control over the use and the outcome of that money. Local people working in the government, bureaucrats, employees, even your elected officials, the only say they have for the ideas that are being implemented are if those ideas fall in line with what the feds want. If your ideas on the local level, your leaders on the local level, their ideas don't fall in there, then they don't count. Helping to apply the pressure, of course, are those NGO groups operating at the local level. Here's what they do. Let's say you've got a really good city council. They get it. And they're pressuring for these programs, and they say no. And we're not going to take a federal grant. No, not going to do that. These NGOs will go to the community, in the news media around, and they'll say, your elected officials are cheating you out of millions of your dollars. And they'll put the pressure on until they finally cave and accept that money. And boom, now it's Agenda 21 ago. Agencies of the federal government are quickly learning how this regional concept helps them enforce their plans. And they are rapidly moving to expand this new model of collaboration. And that's what it is, collaboration. HUD, Department of Transportation, and EPA are also working with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Defense, the Department of Education, the Department of Energy, the Health and Human Services, the Economic Development Administration, FEMA, General Services Administration, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and others, other federal agencies that have related issues. Well, when it is official federal policy, name an agency that doesn't have a related issue. And how is it that they work? How do they work with this? For example, operating under an entity called Partnership for Sustainable Communities, they are targeting local resources through grants under the excuse of helping state and local communities create jobs, stronger economies by developing more sustainability. If that isn't an oxymoron, I've never heard one. You advance sustainability, you kill jobs, and you raise taxes. The grants, with the strings attached, make sure that they have the power to do what they want to do. These powerful agencies can do whatever they want. They change the rules as they go along if it suits their need. They can remove regulatory and policy barriers at the federal level to make it easier for state and local governments to access federal services and resources. So now, you have city council and county commissioners, here's this plan, and now you've got an agent, somebody from one of these agencies in there, and he's saying, don't worry about it. Well, I can get that barrier out of the way for you. We'll take care of it. That's how they operate. There's no rule of law. They just do what they want to do. In this process, they simply align our agency priorities and embed the livability principles in each agency. Now, when you see the words livability principles, that's Agenda 21. All of it's coordinated through transportation, housing, environmental protection, and efforts are, as I said, all coordinated. EPA has engaged HUD and Department of Transportation in its Smart Growth Implementation Assistance Program, which provides direct technical assistance, which are rules, regulations, and money, to urban and rural communities across the country, enforcing code revisions, transit-oriented development, affordable housing, corridor planning, green building codes, and climate change. Let me explain something about corridor planning. Have you ever heard the term landscaping in a federal policy? Let me explain this to you. Landscaping, which is now in at least 35 states with billions of dollars being put into it, takes the attitude, global warming is a fact. Now, since it is a fact, that means, particularly in southern states, they're going to start to warm up pretty quickly. There are animals there who aren't as dumb as humans that are going to start to migrate north to get out of the heat. What we need to do under landscaping is prepare the land where they're going to migrate to. We need to make sure it's there, lock it away. And not only that, we need to make sure their corridors are also prepared. Landscaping. We used to joke about there was an environmental group back in the 90s that said, when California falls into the ocean, Nevada's going to have all this oceanfront property, and that's going to become habitat for a specific bird. So we need to start to lock away that land now to make sure we're prepared. And we laughed at that, and today, landscaping is a reality. Be careful what you say out loud as a joke, because one of these guys is going to hear it and he's going to say, ooh, that's a good idea. This is what your local officials are telling you is a local plan. Does that sound local to you? Every plan is the same across the nation. How does that fit into your unique situation? Every town's got its own unique situation. One size fits all, top down, never work for anything. It doesn't. This top-down control is the perfect description of a Soviet. And that's what sustainable development is. That is what the comprehensive blueprint is in action. That is what regional planning really is. Soviet. Where is there room for your wants and needs and hopes and dreams? And as we expose these programs, proponents start to change the name, not the plan. Today, across the nation and throughout the world, there are regional visioning programs. The minute you hear that term, you know what it is. In fact, in almost every region of every state, there is now a similar planning process, usually ending in the numbers like 2050 or 2030. They're all the exact same plan. I was mentioning to somebody earlier. If you go on the internet, you can find Dubai 2050, Jamaica 2050. Every single state's got one of these. If you want to go into one of these facilitated meetings and really cause some havoc as they're trying to present this local plan to you, download about 3 of these and find that they all have exactly the same language. And go into the meeting and say, sir, is this a local plan? Did you write this? And they'll say, well, yeah, we did. All local leaders here, yeah, we put this together. I say, well, can you explain why it's identical in language to this one in Dubai and this one in Jamaica and this one in Omaha? And is that just a coincidence, sir? That's what they're going to do. They're all the exact same plan, no matter where they are in the world, and one thing they all have in common. None of them are local. That's by design, because most are being implemented by the same planners, with the same grant money, the same NGO groups, and smart growth is a term. Smart growth planners promote their schemes by insisting that Americans live the wrong way. And they use land use regulations to impose on others what they insist is the right way to live. Says the EPA promotional materials, quote, the layout of a city or county and access to public transportation can hugely affect the carbon footprint and overall sustainability of the region. Imagine how we would have all gotten here today if we had to use public transportation. And so it goes around the nation. All of these policies take shape. Some residents, as these are taking shape, some residents are beginning to smell a rat. They're beginning to figure it out. These plans, enforced by non-elected NGOs and bureaucrats, are much more than just good ideas for future growth. Of course, they assure us that these plans are all local and that everyone has the opportunity for input. Really? Well, in Providence, Rhode Island, in a planning hearing there was a room full of local residents who were outraged by a state-led economic development program that they called Roadmap Rhode Island. Aren't these clever guys? Roadmap Rhode Island. It was a raw social engineering scheme that the citizens said very vocally they do not want. And after heated comments in this meeting, the unelected board, regional council, voted unanimously to advance the plan, like they care what you think. These and hundreds of similar events are the untold shame of a government-supported program called Regional Sustainable Development. I mentioned Omaha, Nebraska. I was in Omaha a couple months ago. In Omaha, Nebraska, the government and NGOs forces there are working hard to sell the community on a grand plan for the future called Heartland 2050. Of course, as usual, it's not just for Omaha, but for 8 full counties in the surrounding area, all combined into the same plan. And the plan openly says it's sustainable development. Now listen to the sales pitch. The goal of Heartland 2050, according to its promoters, is to develop a strategic vision for the region's development over the next 30 years to assure proper growth. The metro area is always changing, they say, but is it moving in the right direction? Again, I stop and ask, in the right direction according to whom? This massive plan will lay the ground rules for transportation, housing, jobs, property and land use, education, and even healthcare. And what does all that mean? It means they intend to put a line around the community, all the communities that are involved, and declare little or no growth outside of that line. That means the focus for future housing will be for high-density neighborhoods living in high-rise housing. Why? Because when you put that line around the community, it doesn't grow, but the population does. What happens eventually? The population begins to grow. So somebody asked me one day, well, what do? I said, you go up, because you can't go out. It means the use of private cars will be discouraged in favor of public transportation and bikes and walking. Heartland 2050 includes a program called the Complete Street. This is an edict that cars must share the road with bicycles. Now, we've got these bike plans. I keep running into this, well, what, are you against bicycles? No. Do you know what? When I was a kid, I rode my bike hundreds of miles. I never had a helmet or a silly suit on while I did it. And I didn't need special bike paths to get me there. Bike paths are designed not for recreation, they are designed to be an alternative for you to get where you want to go to get you out of your car. Keep that in mind because that's the only purpose of them. Heartland 2050 calls for traffic calming, which means large speed bumps placed in the center of residential streets that make it very unpleasant to drive over. Now, let's say that you've complied with everything they've thrown at you, and you get one of these little clown cars that only about one person can fit in, and now you need to go to the grocery. And you start down the street, and you have to drive up this side of the speed bump and down that side, and pretty soon, oh, there's another one. Eventually, you're going to say, I'm going to stay home. And that's what they want you to do. Every time they make it more difficult for you to drive, they've discouraged you from doing that. In San Francisco, they are now building residential apartments without parking lots. Again, what am I going to do with my car? It's all designed to reduce your ability to drive so that you use bikes for short trips and public transportation, including light rail trains. So how will all this affect you? Are you going to be happy? Will life in the community improve? Well, the best evidence that I can give you to predict the future is to look at what's already been done. A decade ago, Portland, Oregon was announced as the poster child for for smart growth policy. There, it was pretty much fully implemented. Now, you can fly an airplane over Portland, Oregon, and you can actually see the smart growth lines around the city. On the one side is vast development, dense high-rises. On the other side, basically nothing at all. Now, to help in their pretense that their plans are all local, planners assure the community that they want your input, that you will have a say in every aspect of the plan. Well, you know, surveys taken across the country have shown that 85% of Americans want to live in single-family homes with a yard and a driveway. But smart growth planners ignore that fact. Of course, there's no grant money for old-fashioned single-family neighborhoods, so they don't care what you think. You see, once the ban on suburban development, urban sprawl, that they say disdainfully, is in place, there is now a controlled living area. It doesn't grow. What happens with the population of the community? When it does grow, it gets crowded, more densely populated. In Portland, the planners kept upping the density requirements for housing. To increase urban densities, the planners turned dozens of neighborhoods of single-family homes into apartments and condos. If you owned a vacant lot, you could not build a single-family home on it. You would have to build a row house or an apartment. In some cases, and this happened, the restrictions were so strict that if your house burned down, you could not rebuild a single-family home on it. Eventually, Portland planners decided that row houses and low-rise apartments were not enough. They changed the rules to enforce the building of high-rise apartment buildings. We call them pack and stack. But to sell the regional sustainable development concept, planners present communities with idyllic tales of a pleasant 18th century village lifestyle encased in high-tech 21st century convenience. So you can all live there together, walk to the store, walk to your job, just like, in the 1800s or whatever they did. But you still have the internet, you still have your television, so we have the best of everything. And they use these slick four-color marketing brochures to bring to life sparkling light rails, soothing hiking trails, and minuscule work commutes in settings where every walkable day is a blossom in springtime. They call them livable, walkable communities. They paint a lovely picture of families and neighbors walking to the store, playing in the parks, riding their bikes, playing with their children, happy, healthy neighborhoods, they call it. And where do they get the healthy part? Oh yeah, you're walking and you're riding your bike. In San Francisco, they built a new federal building there that they advocated was the greenest building in America. The elevator in this building only stops on every third floor. Now why? So that you can walk up the steps and be healthy. It's like living in Richard Simmons' world. The center of the plan in Portland was that the light rail train system. They said the desirable homes were those built along the rail line. This would assure ridership. And they claimed no more streets and highways crowded with cars. It's a lie. Independent studies reveal the people living in those special homes don't ride the public transit any more than residents in single-family neighborhoods. The result of Portland's grand plan is that increased density destroyed the small town atmosphere. Congestion is worse. Housing and consumer costs are higher, and urban services such as fire, police, and schools have declined as the city took money from those programs to subsidize high-density developers. There's a good reason why planners need high-pressure sales tactics. The gritty truth behind regional sustainable development across the nation is that, as in Portland, Oregon, it adds to traffic congestion, strips away much of local officials' authority, and makes life unaffordable for many residents. The economics of smart growth are sobering and hit few harder than the poor and young families just starting out. As growth boundaries limit space, new home construction drives up housing prices beyond the reach of most. Studies show that prior to the smart growth surge in the 1990s, an average home cost about 2.5 to 3 times the median income of community residents. So a person earning $40,000 annually could likely purchase a home for $120,000. But in 2006, in smart growth cities like Boston, Portland, and San Diego, homes respectively cost 6.5 to 10.5 times the median family income. Housing costs just 4 times the median income are considered seriously unaffordable. Today, a family in San Diego earning $125,000 would be hard-pressed to afford a home 10 times that value. These smart growth economic realities are now forcing low-income and young people to rent and downsize. The poor have very little hope of ever buying a home and experiencing what used to be called the American dream. Private property ownership is disappearing. Again, in Portland, Oregon, after decades of smart growth development, exorbitant living costs have driven over 10,000 minority families out of their urban homes. In the San Francisco Bay Area, thousands of low-income families are now being uprooted from their homes and relocated, often against their will, into what they call preferred development areas. We'd like to be over here, please. And what is it like living in the utopia of sustainable development? Everything is tightly controlled and well-ordered in that society. Yeah. In Orem, Utah, Betty Perry was arrested, handcuffed, and put in a holding tank because the grass in her front yard was dying. Violation, said the local zoning enforcement officer. Julie Bass in Oak Park, Michigan, wanted to plant an organic garden in her yard. She even asked the mayor and the city council if it was okay, and they said yes. But as she went to work on it, she too was arrested by the local zoning enforcement officer and faced 90 days in jail. Power companies, in partnership with the government, are now installing smart meters on private homes. These meters give the power company control over the temperature in your home. They will control the thermostat as a means to cut your carbon footprint under the excuse of stopping global warming. Let me just mention one thing here. If you have no carbon footprint, you were dead. In Montgomery County, Ohio, Jenny Granado and her family are the victims of the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission as they are forcing a bike highway across their property. The path runs within 7 feet of her front door. Their entire front yard was bulldozed. Her mother had a favorite magnolia tree she liked to sit under. She had a swing there. They had a hedge there to block out the highway that was there. They came in and one day, without warning, and bulldozed the whole thing. Jenny's mother looked out the window. She went outside and saw what they were doing. And at that moment, she keeled over and died from a heart attack. And you know what the Regional Planning Commission said? Stuff happens. They've only paid her a very token for what that was. She went to her county commissioners and she was told that it was up to the regional council. They couldn't help her. It was up to the regional council. The regional council said they had nothing to do with it other than they applied for the grant. You see what I mean about government? Government being taken away from you. Who did she have to go to defend her, to hear her case? No one. She took it to court, and the powerful members of that Regional Planning Commission were able to delay and delay and delay the court case over and over and over again. That's what they do. One of the major problems and one of the major things that we have to do in order to fight back on this, the problem is these guys never feel pain for their actions. And we have got to begin to get legislation together so that they do, so that they are personally responsible when they destroy somebody's life like that, and you can beat them in court, then they need to be personally responsible. Because as it is right now, what happens? If the county has to pay something, doesn't come out of their pocket, comes out of your tax dollars. They need to feel personal pain before we can stop this garbage. These non-elected regional councils should never have the power to legislate. That must be done only by actual elected bodies. Yes, there are elected representatives there, but they need to come back to their elected bodies and face the people before they can put these policies in place. The lack of that is how government is now spiraling out of control. These are not the actions of a free society. Americans are guaranteed the right to the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution to be secure in our homes. The problem is not just traditional zoning and planning. That's been around for a long time. That wasn't this. The problem is the emergence of a raw government power that is unchecked and out of control as it ignores individual liberty and private property rights. Further, we see more and more governments armed with the federal grants imposing arbitrary rules that try to enforce a one-size-fits-all straitjacket on everyone, regardless of individual situations. And more government power leads to more government corruption. Even if you believe there needs to be changes in our society to protect the environment, surely any honest American would admit that such actions by government are out of line. Yet as Americans are being forced to live this way, all under the excuse of environmental protection, here's the kicker. The little-known fact, none of it is necessary because it doesn't work. A couple of years ago, the American Planning Association did a study to see if all their efforts to enforce smart growth worked. The APA's own study reported that smart growth does not work. Here's the final concluding paragraph of that APA study. It says, quote, "The current planning policy strategies for land use and transportation have virtually no impact on the major long-term increases in resource and energy consumption. They generally tend to increase costs and reduce economic competitiveness. In many cases, the socioeconomic consequences of less housing choices, crowding, and congestion may outweigh the very modest CO2 reduction benefits." When you start talking about modest, we're talking 0.00001 modest. But does the APA plan to change its planning policies? Not on your life. Why? Money. The lifeblood of the American Planning Association and the rest of these vampires. The grant money it lives on would dry up if they ever decided to take their foot off of our throats and let people and local communities decide for themselves, as we did when we built the richest, freest nation in history. And that's why I and thousands of other Americans are so concerned. Nameless, faceless bureaucrats wielding power in the back rooms, untouched and unseen, is not freedom. Agenda 21 proposes a global regime that will monitor, oversee, and strictly regulate our planet's oceans, lakes, streams, rivers, aquifers, and seabeds, coastlands, wetlands, forests, jungles, grasslands, farmland, desert tundra, and mountains. It proposes plans for cities, towns, suburbs, villages, and rural areas. It envisions a global scheme for healthcare, education, nutrition, agriculture, labor, production, and consumption. In short, everything. There is nothing on, in, over, or under the earth that doesn't fall within the purview of some sort of Agenda 21. Private property ownership is the reason the United States has been the richest, freest nation in the world. Isn't it significant to see that as private property comes under attack through sustainable development, that our country is also becoming less wealthy and less free? It's time that we had a government that treats property owners like owners. It's theirs. It's their land. They're not chattel to be pushed around at their whim. It's time to treat property owners like adults. And it's time to realize that the sustainabilists who profess compassion to save the world really don't want to help the environment or eradicate poverty or even improve human living conditions. Sustainable development was created to rein in those radical ideas of individuality and personal property ownership and harmonize all nations into global tyranny and control. That's what it's for. And it will result in the dark ages across the world unlike anything ever experienced in human societies. One fact is clear. You cannot implement sustainable development without diminishing property rights. Stand up for property rights, and you can stop Agenda 21 and sustainable development. Now I know, as I said in the beginning, many of you are discouraged, feeling hopeless, believing we have lost our precious republic, but in cities, I'm going to tell you, in cities and towns across the nation, real opposition is beginning to stir. Americans are beginning to learn the tyranny of sustainable policy, and they are starting to fight back. They are challenging. The City Council and County Commissioner meeting after meeting, they are challenging the planners. Legislators are starting to write laws against it. For the first time since I started this fight, I am starting to hear from elected officials asking for ideas on how to oppose it. They call me up and they say, I just got elected and I want to do something about this. What do I do? And I'll say, try this, try this, try that. And they'll call, I had one in particular who called me back a couple weeks later and said, okay, I did that, now what do I do? Never happened before. This is a major development. Already, more than 150 cities have ended their memberships in ICLEI. And at least 10 state legislatures have tried to pass anti-sustainable legislation. Now, Alabama was the first to do that, but Tennessee and several other states have Oklahoma, others have attempted to do that. Even when we lose, and this is what's vitally important for you to understand, even when we lose a battle, if we fought the battle, we made progress. Never, ever forget that, and never look at your defeat with your heads down. Look at what you do next. Don't ever take a defeat as the end. Come back. I just returned from Augusta, Maine, where I presented testimony against smart growth to a state legislative committee. That is historic for our movement. It never happened before. The liberals will be beside themselves. And now I'm helping the legislator there who brought me to help write private property protection language. And the senator who was chairman of that committee said it was important that I be there because that helped set the perspective of what the legislation was about to help pass it. And so we're learning new tactics and new legislative plans to knock out Agenda 21 policies. We don't know everything. We learn as we go along. A few years ago, everything that we had, all our articles, our DVDs, everything, all said, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me, because nobody was listening. All of a sudden, I started getting letters from people saying, okay, I get it. What do I do about it? And I jokingly said, I don't know. I never got that far before. So I started spending my time focusing on how to fight back. And that's what we're working on. My friends, don't look down at your feet. A revolution has begun. The fight starts at the local level. And if we can maintain freedom in our own community, we can do it as a nation. Let that revolution catch fire here today. With each one of you. Thank you. Thank you.